Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the December 2023 edition of Epic Insight. This is Joe Corona. I'm the Director of Sales and Strategic Partnerships at Epic Retirement Plan Services, and I will be your host for today's call. With today's Epic Insight, we're going to help you become a better public speaker, whether you're doing a formal presentation or speaking in a spontaneous situation. Knowing the right words to choose and how to deliver them and so critically important to ensure that you deliver your intended message to your audience. To help introduce our speaker today is Rob Mudd from Principal Asset Management. An industry veteran of nearly 25 years, Rob is an associate director with Principal Asset Management and is headquartered in Des Moines, Iowa. Your line will be muted throughout the call, but if you have any questions that you would like addressed, we ask you that you enter them in the webinar control panel, and we will address them towards the latter part of the session. With that, I will turn it over to Rob.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Joe. Welcome, everyone. Epic is a very important client to Principal Asset Management, and we're thankful for the opportunity today to sponsor Matt Abrams. As Joe mentioned, Matt is he's an industry expert in communications with decades of experience. He's currently a lecturer at Stanford University Graduate School of Business, where he focuses on popular classes such as strategic communication and virtual presenting. Matt also is an award-winning podcaster and an author to multiple books, including one that just was released called Think Faster, Talk Smarter: How to Speak Successfully When You're Put on the Spot when you're put on the spot. In the next 30 minutes, I think it's going to be a great opportunity for us to learn how to handle ourselves in spontaneous conversations that we find in, day out situations with our clients. And with that, I will turn it over to Matt.
Excellent. Rob, thank you so much. And Joe, thank you for inviting me. I am very excited to be here with all of you. And I'm excited today to talk about speaking and how to communicate better. This is named for our book, for my book, Think Faster, Talk Smarter: How to Speak Successfully When Put on the Spot. And the reality is this, that speaking in a planned way is very, very challenging when we have to plan it out, think about the audience, create an agenda for the meeting. But speaking is actually made even more difficult when we're put on the spot. And if you think about it, most of our communication is spontaneous. It's not planned. It's the toasts we make, it's the introductions, it's the feedback, the Q&A. All of this makes our lives more challenging. And many of us get really, really nervous in high stakes communication period, but especially spontaneous communication. So today I'd like for us to think about those circumstances and ways in which that we can actually improve. So key to all of this is that when we make connection, when we build trust, it comes through this type of communication. So as you think about your clients, your partners, your colleagues, it is in these spontaneous moments of communication that the magic happens. So how do we become more effective and better spontaneous communicators? Well, it really boils down to two major categories. It's about mindset and messaging. So I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about each of these two components, giving you some practical tips. And then what's really exciting for me is I'd love to take your questions about these topics. So let's go ahead and get started talking about mindset and messaging. Regardless of your speaking in the moment or in a planned way, anxiety looms large. Many people get nervous speaking in front of others. The first step in the 6-step methodology that I teach is dealing with anxiety. Anxiety affects up to 85% of people in high stakes speaking situations. And quite frankly, I think the other 15% are lying. I think we could create a situation that would make them feel nervous too. So how do we begin to manage anxiety? We do so by taking a two-pronged approach. We have to manage both symptoms and sources. Many of you listening can think of a situation where you would get quite nervous. And what happens for you could be that your heart starts beating faster, you start turning red and perspiring. Maybe it's that you get a little shaky. These are symptoms, and there's some things we can do to manage those symptoms. One great way to manage the symptoms of anxiety is to take a deep belly breath. If you've ever done yoga or Tai Chi, it's a deep belly breath where you fill your lower abdomen. And what the research tells us is the most effective way to do this breathing to reduce anxiety is to focus on your exhale being longer than your inhale. So if I take a 3 count in, I take a 6 count out. In doing so, slows down your autonomic nervous system. It gives you more energy, slows your heart rate down, and slows down your speaking rate. So it's a great tool to address many of the symptoms of anxiety. If you're somebody who shakes, that's adrenaline, and adrenaline is trying to help you move away from the threat you feel of speaking in front of others and move you to safety. So when you start a presentation, if you're physically in a room with people standing up, take a step towards them. If you're seated, gesture broadly. If you're virtual, as I am today, lean in. These forward motions give that adrenaline a place to go, and you will stop shaking. Many nervous people make themselves tight and they retreat, so they shake more. By giving that energy a place to go, you actually can shake less. So those are ways of managing some of the symptoms of anxiety. But there still are sources. Sources are the things that initiate and exacerbate our anxiety. One big thing that does this is the second step in the methodology. And this is the fact that we want to be right when we communicate. We want to do it right. We want to be perfect. The reality is this: there is no right way to communicate. There are better ways and worse ways, but there is no one right way. And when we put all this pressure on ourselves, we get very nervous, which makes it likely we won't do as well. So we need to see speaking not as about being perfect, but as about being a conversation where we connect. So I like to say communication is about connection, not perfection. And when we dial down that volume of trying to do it right, we actually free up a whole bunch of mental resources to do it really well. And it is in that connection that we form trust and long-lasting relationships. So how do we help ourselves do that? When we're presenting or speaking, we remind ourselves that we are in service of our audience. We are here to help them. It's not about us, it's about them and their needs. And by reminding yourself of that, you can reduce your anxiety, again, going back to step 1, and you do so by adjusting your focus on connection, not perfection, which is step 2. Step 3 in the process has to do with seeing these challenging, spontaneous speaking situations, giving feedback, introducing yourself, fixing a mistake that gets made. Rather than seeing those as threatening, let's see them as opportunities. Opportunities to connect, to collaborate, to extend, to learn. So there are some things we can do to see these spontaneous moments as positive, as opportunities. For example, many of you are familiar with basketball, especially college basketball. There was a very famous coach. His name was Mike Krzyzewski, Coach K. And one of the tools that he taught his players to help them see circumstances as opportunities rather than deficits was this notion of next play. So if you're an athlete and you do something really, really well, you don't sit there and gloat and boast. You get back and do the next play. Similarly, if something is threatening or challenging and doesn't go well, instead of ruminating and beating yourself up, you get on to the next play. So if you're a basketball player and you shoot a shot and it misses, instead of sitting there saying, I practiced this so many times, I can't believe I missed it, how could I have missed it? That rumination, you're missing the action that happens next. So move on to the next play. Now, this does not say we don't reflect. One of the only ways to get better at communication is to take time to reflect, but we do that after the fact, not in the midst. So if you're answering a question and it doesn't go well, you don't say, oh man, I gave a bad answer. Actually, let me try to correct that. No, just next play. Maybe you give a little more detail. Maybe in the next question, you can pull in what you wanted to say in that prior question. Next play helps you be more opportunistic. Similarly, many of us want to avoid mistakes when we communicate. Mistakes are how we learn. If we give ourselves permission to have some mistakes, it helps us. But I like seeing mistakes not as something that's wrong or bad, but is something that's just normal in how we communicate. In fact, I like to reframe mistakes as missed takes. If you know anything about television or movie production, you know that when they film a movie or a TV show, they do multiple takes of a scene. We've probably all seen one of those clapboards where they go take one, take two. They film the same scene in multiple ways. Maybe an actor standing or sitting. Maybe they do it in one emotion versus another. No one take is bad or wrong. It is simply a different way of doing it. So if you see your communication as just a series of takes, any one that doesn't go the way you want is just a missed take. You'll simply take another one. So by looking at next play and next take, or missed take, we actually help ourselves see speaking in front of others as an opportunity, not a threat or challenge. And then the final set of mindset beyond managing anxiety, connection over perfection, and seeing these as opportunities is listening well. I know every single one of you understands the value of listening when you're working with your clients and prospects. Listening is important. Unfortunately, most of us are not good listeners. We listen just enough to get the gist of what somebody is saying before we begin rehearsing, judging, and evaluating. So we're not really connecting or listening. In fact, I heard just the other day, somebody said, oh, listening, that's what I do when I'm just waiting for my turn to speak. And that's our approach. We just see it as what has to happen before we can say more. That's the wrong approach. We need to listen deeply. We need to listen for the bottom line, not the top line. I have a colleague at Stanford's Business School. His name is Collins Dobbs. And Collins teaches a class on crucial communications. And he uses a framework that I borrow with his permission to talk about listening. It's three things: pace, space, grace. In order to listen better, you have to slow the pace down. Our lives are very busy. We're always running around, moving from one thing to the next. We need to slow the pace down. And when we slow down, we can actually listen better. We also need to give ourselves space, sometimes physical space to just hear better, but often mental space. We have to clear the decks and focus, be present on what the person is saying. And then finally, grace. Grace is permission not only to listen to what's said, but how it's said, where it's said, the intensity with which it is said. And when you give yourself a little bit of grace, you hear a lot more. So by listening for the bottom line, pace, slowing things down, space, giving yourself mental space to be present, and grace, listening completely, not just to the words, but how they're said, you can actually connect better. Those are the first four steps that help us to be better in the moment communicators with very specific techniques that you can employ. Now, the second part of that process is messaging, what you actually say. Many of us, when we are speaking in general, but specifically when it's spontaneous speaking, we take our audiences on a journey of a discovery of what we're saying and thinking as we're saying and thinking it. In other words, we list a lot of information. Our brains were not designed to remember lists. In fact, think about how many items do you need from the grocery store before you actually have to write it down to remember. If you're like most people, it's right around 4 or 5 before you have to write things down. Our brains are not wired for lists. So if you're just itemizing lists with your clients or prospects, you're actually likely losing them and losing credibility. It is much better to package information up in a structure or a framework. There are many structures and frameworks that exist. My favorite, and one I encourage all of you to use, is 3 simple questions. What? So what? Now what? What? So what? Now what? What is the information that you're sharing? It could be about a particular offering, a product line, a service, could be an update you're giving. That's the what. The so what is why is it important and relevant to the person or people you're talking to? And then the now what is what you'd like to have come next. So for example, When I am giving an update, I might give the update, that's my what. I'll explain why the update is important, and then I'll talk about what I'm doing next. If you're introducing a particular offering that you have, the what is your offering? You would name it and explain it. The so what is why you think it is important and relevant for the audience you're talking to. And then the now what is what the next steps are. Let me show you. Would you like to sign up for it? Let's set up another meeting. By using that structure of what, so what, now what, it can really help you package information up so it's clear, it's concise, it's relevant, and most importantly, the people you're talking to are likely to easily remember it. Now, I want to take a quick time out here. I just explained that structure by using that structure. I told you what the structure was, why it was important, and how you can use it. So everything I've said today has been in that structure. So we have one last step. Once you've structured your message, the big problem is we say more than we need to. Most of us are not as concise and clear as we should be. We say more. My mother has this wonderful saying. I know she didn't create it, but it's tell me the time, don't build me the clock. Many of us, especially those of you who do what you do, are clock builders. We say more than we need to. If people really want to learn more, they'll ask. So we need to make sure that we're concise. How do we do that? First, we have to have a clear goal when we communicate. To me, a goal has three parts: information, emotion, and action. In other words, what do you want your audience to know? How do you want them to feel? And what do you want them to do? So whenever I go into a communication situation, I'm thinking, what do I want these people to know at the highest level? How do I want them to feel? Do I want them to feel safe and secure, confident, excited, concerned, or fear of missing out? What are the feelings I want? And then ultimately, what do I want them to do? And if I have that in mind, then I can focus everything I say based on that goal. Additionally, to be more clear and concise, we need to define our terms and terminology. In your field, there are lots of terms and acronyms and concepts that the people you're talking to might not understand. Yet you suffer from what I call the curse of knowledge and the curse of passion. You know too much about your topic and you care a lot about it. And because of that, you might mistakenly use jargon and acronyms and technical concepts that your audience doesn't know. The only antidote to having the curse of knowledge and passion is empathy. You literally have to spell out acronyms for your audience. So how do we get focused? We have a clear goal and we think about the language we use. So taken together, those 6 steps, both mindset and messaging, help your audience to better understand your information. And it helps you package up the information in a way that makes your life easier. If you follow these steps, you will feel more comfortable and confident in your communication. Your communication will be better structured and focused, which makes it more memorable. And ultimately, your audience will learn more from you, trust you more, and feel more connected to you. That's what thinking faster and talking smarter is all about. And it is my hope that in that conversation, you've learned some tools that can help you. And before we're done, I'll point you to some other resources that go deeper into what I've said, as well as give other information. With that, I would love to see if we have any specific questions regarding what it is I've said, or perhaps something I haven't said that you're curious about. And I think I'm going to have some help asking the questions. So I would love to hear from any of you about the questions that you have.
So Matt, this is Joe. While we wait for some questions to come through the control panel, one question that I had was, a while back, one of my mentors would always tell me, especially when you're presenting in a formal setting, record yourself presenting the topic. And you can take a listen to, obviously, the topic you're presenting about, how many of the ums are you throwing in there? Are you concise with the language that you're using? What is your feeling about recording yourself as you're preparing a formal presentation? And maybe even in some of these spontaneous situations, how would you react if you did have an opportunity to see yourself in action, so to speak, with the terminology that you utilize?
Yeah, so I think recording yourself is a wonderful tool to help you be a better communicator. It is incredibly painful to watch yourself present. It is absolutely really hard to do, but you learn so much. Just like you said, you learn about your presence, what you do with your body and voice. You learn what you do with your speaking rate. Are you fast? Are you slow? You can hear those filler words. I make all of my Stanford MBA students, for every major communication they do, they get recorded and they have to watch it not once, not twice, but 3 times. They watch once with sound only, once with video only, and then once with those together. While painful, they learn so much about what it is that we're talking about. So I think recording yourself is great. Obviously, it's hard to do in spontaneous situations, but you can learn a lot even just in practicing for this spontaneous situation. So great idea, good suggestion. Your mentor gave you good advice, I think. Do we have some questions coming in? A question I'm often asked while we're waiting is, what do we do when we're speaking virtually? Many of us these days are speaking virtually, as I am now. And I have some tips for virtual communication I'd like to share. The first tip has to do with how you actually show up on screen. You want to fill half the screen with your body. Many of us sit so far away that we look like a distant constellation in the sky. People like to see your faces. Similarly, we want to have not a lot of space between the top of your head and the top of your box. I have a 4-finger rule. Before you actually say join meeting, put 4 fingers on top of your head and just make sure that there's that much space. If you're doing this where you're putting your fingers on top of each other, you're sitting too far away. Second, raise your camera up. Many of us are on laptops, so the camera is coming under our chin. Nobody looks good that way. In fact, when I was a kid, we used to take flashlights and shine it under our chin to look scary. So raise your camera up, get a box, a book, a stand, that will help. And then finally, make sure you have good lighting. I have a big light shining on me here. Many people look like they are in the witness protection program when they're sitting doing these things. Invest in good lighting and that will help. When you're actually presenting, gesture. We normally gesture when we speak, but when you gesture inside this box, you have to gesture higher. So my hands are actually at my shoulder level. I tell people, put your thumbs at your shoulder, not your head. This looks crazy, but down here. So if I were to say, welcome everybody, notice my thumbs are at my shoulder. I also look at the camera, so it makes it look like I'm talking to you. Even when you're speaking to me, the temptation is to look down at people's video, but when I look down, it looks like I'm looking at your shoes. So I need to look at the camera to help. When you do these things, you come off as more confident, competent, and somebody who's more trustworthy. So I encourage you to focus on your nonverbal presence this way. Let's see if I stalled long enough for any questions. I'm not seeing any questions. Joe, do you see any, or do you have some coming in a different way?
No, I don't see any questions, but I do have a question myself.
Sure.
Going back to the presentation format, and one thing you'd mentioned in terms of when you're interacting with your audience, you know, whether you take a step forward or take a step back. I'm usually one, when I'm presenting, I like to move about the stage if I'm present, or move about the boardroom, so to speak, if you're talking to a group of individuals. Your thoughts about you know, the ability to move around a stage or a setting, or do you think it's actually more comfortable to stand alongside a podium where you have kind of that anchor spot? Your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so movement is good. Movement is good. It helps engage your audience. It helps free you up as a speaker. The trick is you don't want your movement to be distracting. You don't want to be pacing back and forth. So my advice is to follow the advice of stand-up comedians, which is never walk during your punchline. Now you might say, I'm not trying to be funny, but everything you say builds up to something. Whatever that buildup is your punchline. So walk during transitions when you move from one point to the next. Try to avoid standing behind something. It looks like you're distant and trying to protect yourself. When I have a lectern or podium, I'll stand to the side of it and turn the microphone so I'm never behind it. So movement is good as long as it's not too distracting. And you can even move when you're virtual. I come in sometimes and I lean back a little bit. So these are ways that we can communicate our confidence and keep our audience engaged. So movement is definitely a good thing to use.
Great. Looks like we have some questions that have funneled through the question panel. First one is, any helpful tips for someone not good at small talk?
Yeah, I got lots to say about small talk. So the first thing is small talk needs to be rebranded. Small talk, a lot of good things happen during small talk. You connect, you learn, you expand, good stuff happens. Here's my advice. I host a podcast called Think Fast, Talk Smart. It's for Stanford's Business School. It's all about communication skills, very accessible. I interviewed a woman, her name's Rachel Greenwald. She's a professional matchmaker. She gets people into romantic relationships, and she's an academic, fascinating person. So small talk is really in her wheelhouse. And she said the key to effective small talk is the notion of you want to be interested, not interesting. And that means you have to ask questions. You have to be curious. So the goal is not to make yourself sound like you're the best and the smartest. Rather, it's to ask questions. So what are those questions? Ask open questions. Ask questions about common experiences that you and the other people are having. That gets people talking. And then invoke the most powerful 3 words you can invoke to keep the conversation going. My mother-in-law has a black belt in small talk. And she does it with these 3 simple words: tell me more. So after you get a conversation going and somebody says something, simply say, tell me more. That gives them permission to share, that invites them to be more engaged. Very, very powerful. So small talk is a big deal. Lead with curiosity, highlight things that are in a shared experience, and then ask, tell me more. And if you do those things, it's going to be easier for you and easier for the other people you're interacting with.
All right, great. Our next question, thoughts on Toastmasters?
I love Toastmasters. I think Toastmasters is fantastic. I am a former Toastmaster, and in fact, I just spoke at their international convention a few months ago. So for those of you who don't know, Toastmasters is an international organization solely focused on helping people develop communication and leadership skills. There are Toastmasters organization or offices or groups, I should say, everywhere in the world. If you go to toastmasters.org, type in your zip code, you will find one nearby for sure. They're very inexpensive. They meet once a week. They follow a sort of a similar pattern, and they help you both with your planned speaking as well as your spontaneous in the moment speaking. I think it's a wonderful organization. In fact, some companies actually start their own Toastmasters groups within the company. So it's a great venue to practice, to explore, to meet like-minded people. I strongly encourage it.
All right, thanks, Matt. And then the last question that we have received is, what do you do when the audience is unresponsive?
Yes, exactly. That's hard. So it's really about engagement. One, remind yourself your job is to get material across. It's not to get through it. So many people don't care. They just bulldoze their way through whatever their content is, rather than thinking about, is it landing? Is it helping the audience? So if you notice your audience isn't engaged or getting it, you need to adjust and adapt. The single best thing you can do is make it more relevant to them. When an audience feels something is valuable to them and relevant, they pay more attention. So can you ask a question to get them involved? You say, how might this impact you? Or wouldn't it be great if you could? So those are phrases or ways to get people to say, oh yeah, this would be important. This is something that I see value in. And typically then they'll lean in and they'll engage more. So really important to, one, notice when your audience is with you or not. And then when they're not, get them engaged through relevance, through asking questions or painting pictures about the value of what you're talking about. That makes a huge difference in communication.
Great, thank you, Matt. Well, that wraps up the questions for today. Matt, I'll turn it over to you for any closing thoughts for our group today.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I am first and foremost deeply grateful for having me here, Joe and Rob, for making this happen. I hope you're taking away value from some of the things that I've talked about. In the chat, I'm putting a link to a website I curate. It has a whole bunch of resources on things I've said and things I haven't said. Please take a view. Consider listening to Think Fast, Talk Smart, the podcast, or purchasing the book, Think Faster, Talk Smarter. And if you're on LinkedIn, please connect with me. I'm a big user of LinkedIn. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you so much.
I was on mute. Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Joe, for this opportunity. One of the things that Principal Asset Management would like to do is we would like to offer to purchase Matt's book for you, his new book, Think Fast, Think Faster, Talk Smarter. I know that there's going to be a message that goes out from Joe and Chris, and there'll be instructions in there as far as how to send me your address, and we will get you that book. So hopefully you all learned a lot today, and I know that the book expands on many of the things that Matt talked about in our session.
All right, great. Well, we would like to thank Matt Abrams and Rob Mudd, and thank you, all of you, for joining this Epic Insight webinar. As a reminder, we will be sending out a recording of the presentation as well as the instructions on how to request the book from Rob. And on behalf of Epic Retirement Plan Services, I'd like to extend our wishes to all for a happy holiday season and a happy and healthy new year. Please don't hesitate to contact us if there's anything that Epic Retirement Plan Services or Principal Asset Management can do to support you and your efforts. Thank you, and we look forward to having you join us on an upcoming edition of Epic Insight. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.